Riemen es un pensador de los Países Bajos, lo que llamamos Holanda usualmente, que se ha dedicado a buscar una visión humanista, una visión que se oponga a los autoritarismos. Acaba de publicar en español este libro que tengo conmigo, Para combatir esta era, consideraciones urgentes sobre el fascismo y el humanismo. Mr. Riemen, thank you very much for being with us. Is fascism still a threat? And I'm saying this because a lot of people believe that it isn't a threat after 50 years, 60 years. But is it still a threat?
I think it's very much a threat, but we try to hide it. I think because of a sense of shame, at least in Europe and the United States of America, where we were supposed, after the horror of World War II, it would never come back again. So we prefer to talk in terms of populism and the extreme right or the alt-right or Trumpism or Putinism or whatever. But it is fascism. It is fascism. And we should not be surprised because, as I explain in that book, what political scientists do not understand, but important artists like Thomas Mann and Albert Camus understood very well, in which they both argued independently of each other in 1947. They said, look, don't make a mistake, the war is over, but fascism did not disappear. And why is it that fascism did not disappear? Because they understood all too well, because they had gone through it, that when a democracy turns into a mass democracy, so beautifully and importantly explained by Ortega y Gasset, when it becomes a mass democracy, when it's no longer about free-floating information, but when you have now the whole phenomenon of propaganda, which we now call fake news and alternative facts. When a society is no longer driven by the by spiritual moral values, but is imprisoned by fear and greed, and when you then have not political leaders but demagogues who wants to use these basic sentiments, and that mix it with resentment and xenophobia, then you get into the world of fascism.
How do you define fascism? I mean,
Well,
how do you? What's the difference between fascism and good old authoritarianism?
Yeah, well, okay. Well, first of all, there is no definition of fascism. As there is no definition of socialism, as there is no definition of the left or the right or love or friendship. Giambattista Vico already explained long time ago that we should not fall into the trap of Descartes. Definitions are okay for the world of nature, empirism, etc., etc. But when we talk about human nature and our society, it's beyond the world of definitions. So an important American historian, Robert Paxton, already argued a few decades ago, fascism you will always recognize by certain characteristics. And those characteristics are the charismatic leader, the xenophobia, the nationalism, the populism, and the politics of lies, always lies. Now,
but we find exactly the same thing with some members of the left, of the extreme left. I mean, Hugo Chavez was charismatic, and he was authoritarian. He was lying all the time.
No. But look, in the interesting thing is if we just talked about Trotsky,
yes.
And we are now still, it's 100 years ago that we had this Russian revolution. But the interesting thing is we talk about Stalinism,
yes.
But the people who lived in the era of Stalin, Mandelstam, Pasternak, Akhmatova, Shostakovich, they all spoke about Soviet fascism. For them there was no difference.
Soviet fascism.
Soviet fascism. That's the term which is used by the Russian intellectuals at that time. There is no difference. Of course there is no difference. So I mean, these are, again, fantasies from political scientists who wants to be very specific, etc., etc., etc. And they are missing the general trend, as they are now missing the general trend, because it's almost shameful if the academic class still wants to talk about populism, all these things, without recognizing what we are really dealing with. The consequence of it is we are not capable to make a strategy how to deal with it. I mean, if you look at the United States of America, the Democrats, they don't have a leadership, there are no ideas, there's no strategy, so Trump is there to stay. with all the political consequences.
Is Trump kind of a fascist?
Yeah, he's the classic example of the modern fascist mind. Is America a fascist state? No, not yet. Thank God. And it's also not a police state. Thank God, it's not like Russia, it's not like China. But that Trump is a classic fascist. I mean, that's obvious. As we are having in Europe, we have Mr. Orban, and we see what's going on in France, we see what's going on in my country, and we see what's going on in Germany, and so on and so forth. We see what's going on in Poland, where they had a mass of the fascists a week ago.
What can we do then against this resurgence of fascist or quasi-fascist governments and politicians?
Well,
As
first
a
of all,
society,
let's accept the facts. Okay, as long as we stay in this state of denial, there is nothing we can do. So let's accept this is what we are dealing with. Then an understanding of where does it come from. Now a lot of books are written about Trump. That's that's too little and too late. It doesn't matter, and also because Trump is not the real problem. He's the epitome. He's not the cause.
there are millions of people who voted for Trump. That's the problem, am I
yes,
right?
and why is it that they vote for Trump? They voted for Trump because we are dealing with a defect in our culture. We are dealing with a crisis of our civilization. It's not a social crisis. It's not a political crisis. As famously, your fellow countryman Octavio Paz once argued in The Labyrinth of Solitude, a political crisis is always a moral crisis.
That's right.
We are dealing with a profound moral crisis. Now, the problem of the left, the problem of the liberals, and I consider myself a liberal, I come from a social democratic family, is that they reduce the human identity just to social and political factors. What they ignored for way too long is the spiritual and cultural and moral dimension of life. And so that's the first thing to get it back. Last night when I was in the important symposium on the future of our civilization organized by this University of Guadalajara and UNAM, and I spoke about solidarity and responsibility, I said, look, intellectuals have a special responsibility, and I include journalists and academics among the intellectuals. Because, you know, in a certain way, we live a very privileged life, okay? I mean, we can rise, we shave or not, and then we go to our study and read books or the newspapers and we write about it. It's a very comfortable life. Yes. But it comes with an obligation, noblesse oblige. And the obligation is a strict commitment to the truth. And the truth in the intellectual world is a truth which is beyond science. It's a kind of metaphysical truth which has an idea what human dignity is all about. And the sense of human dignity comes with the awareness of the fact that mankind is a united thing. This was already, Kant knew it, but it is what Judaism, Christianity and Socrates teaches us. That our true identity is not based what makes us different, but that our true identity is everybody's capacity to live in truth, to do justice and to create beauty. Which means we are dealing with universal values. And at the very moment a liberal class of the left starts talking about anything goes, post-modernity, there are no universal values, I mean this kind of sophisticated nihilism. And then they turn themselves into the useful idiots.
Okay.
Which can easily be used by all kind of power forces. And this is how, bit by bit, we got into this terrible political situation.
I get the feeling that these new fascists or populists, or whatever you call them, are having it easier to enter into society, for example, in Europe because of radical Islam, or in the US because of the rejection to the Mexicans who have come to colonize parts of the US.
Yeah,
what do you think about that?
Well, first of all, it does matter how we call them. Because fascist and populist are not the same, right?
All right.
So I prefer to stick to the term fascist, and I will want a strong plea that everybody should do it.
I will do that.
Okay. Now, fascism, which is always deprived of a positive idea, right? I mean, which is the big difference with the world of communism, because it's a very nihilistic approach. It's only about power, 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 and they will use everything they can to tell their own people those people are a threat. Those people from the Islam, those immigrants, those Mexicans, those Jews are a threat to your culture, to your welfare state, to your community. Well, it is a profound lie. It is a profound lie, first of all, on a moral base. If we recognize the fact that we are all human, and because you're there, you're entitled to live and to live your life in dignity, wherever you come from, whatever your gender is, whatever your sexual interests are, or whatever.
The old humanist values.
Yeah, well, but the old humanist values are the core of a civilized society.
Yes.
And without this core, there will be no civilized society, and the only alternative for a civilized society is what we are getting now. Violence, corruption, civil wars, tribalism, and so on and so forth. Now, we know what that means. We also know that the consequences to have this back again in our society will be endlessly worse. Okay, so again, there is an obligation, especially among the intellectual class, to remember what Albert Camus once said just after the war in a heated debate with Jean-Paul Sartre, André Malraux, and Kastler. He writes about it in one of his notebooks. They are there because in France there is this decision after the war: should we have an alliance with Stalin or with the United States of America? And Malraux, who at that moment was extremely prominent, very close to de Gaulle, had brought them together. And Kastler was silent, and Sartre made a plea: look, we have to stick to Stalin. We have to stick to communism, because the United States of America, with this slavery and capitalism, we can never accept that thing. And Camus, younger than Sartre, then said, well, but don't you think, Jean-Paul, André, Arthur, that we intellectuals who have come out of the world of Nietzsche, that we have to go out and tell the public there are moral values and stand up and fight for them? That's the moment when there is this break between Sartre and Camus.
Rob Riemen, author of Para combatir esta era, consideraciones urgentes sobre el fascismo y el humanismo. Thank you very much for this conversation and for giving us a voice of alert to some of the dangers society is facing right now.
Thank you so much.
Y a usted, amigo televidente, que hace posible este programa, se lo agradezco también. Esto es todo por hoy, pero no se le olvide. Nos vemos la próxima.